Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about marketing, targeted advertising, and how it's really destroyed the creativity in the advertising sphere, and I think significantly harmed creativity in the creative spheres as well, the actual creative product areas. So in order to explain this, we're going to have to take kind of a deep dive into marketing and targeted advertising specifically and how things have changed over the years. So if you notice that movie posters tend to be, let's say a bit generic, like this Star Wars one. You notice a lot of just two-color designs and things like that. A lot of stuff that I've talked about on the channel as far as book cover designs. Or you notice that book covers are just incredibly interchangeable. A book cover is a kind of ad. There's a reason for this, and it has to do with a little bit of a feedback loop that occurs with targeted advertising. So what changed in advertising about 10 to 15 years ago is the targeted advertising revolution. Instead of having to have a general target for your ad, like if you're advertising in a women's magazine in the past, you had an idea that women would be reading it, but you didn't know what their specific tastes in movies were or books, what their favorite books were, what kind of sports they like to do, how many kids they had. You didn't know anything about the specific user. You just knew women in general might read this magazine, so you created an ad that would appeal to women in general. That was as close to targeted advertising as you could get back in the day. And likewise with TV, you might know, okay, this is kind of a kids program, so maybe we'll advertise cereal or something on it, something that kids generally like. And through that, you also had to be very creative in advertising because people have been surrounded by ads for such a long time. You go to the supermarket, there's an ad on a stand, there's ads everywhere. To cut through the noise, you had to be very creative. You had to come up with a lot of things that would be memorable to people. The reason people talked about commercials on the Super Bowl is companies paid a lot of money to get an ad on the Super Bowl, and so they really wanted to cut through the noise and have their best possible ad on the Super Bowl so people would remember it, and people would remember it. There's like Budweiser frogs and all these different gag and joke sort of ads that were popping up in the 90s was because the really finely gradated targeted advertising that emerged later didn't exist yet. You had to cut through the noise. Famous Apple 1984 commercial where the runner comes in and throws the hammer at the screen and says 1984 will not be like 1984, and they're announcing a new product, the Macintosh computer. These creative ideas aren't present in advertising anymore because you actually don't need to cut through the noise. So what happened was targeted advertising went from here's a women's magazine to here's an end user with very specific tastes, a history of clicking things, watching things, reading certain articles, and on their Facebook profile, a list of books that they like to read. So when I go on Facebook and I want to advertise something on Facebook, and I haven't used Facebook ads in quite a while now because I just really, really don't like Facebook as a platform anymore. But if I was going to do this, I could set up an ad that would target people who like Michael Moorcock and Brandon Sanderson and the intersection of those two. And I could advertise to thousands of people just on that. You can even get really finely tuned. I want people who like these three things, all three of those three things. And I want people that are between the ages of 25 and 30, and I want all males. You could go really, really specific. So specific that you know the product that they're going to want ahead of time. So this changed with social media, with Facebook, with Google targeted advertising, and Google AdSense, as well as YouTube, Twitter, you name it. It's all focused at the end user. So the result is, as an advertiser, you don't need to be creative. There's not as much noise to cut through. You have the user's attention on YouTube. They have to click the skip ad button. They have to watch some of your ad. And the most noise that you get through is just trying to convince someone not to click away and not to scroll past, versus a sea of ads where yours really has to stand out, where someone is actually having to view ads all the time. It's a completely different environment. So you don't have to be as creative with it. And more importantly, being creative is really not what you want. What you want to do with targeted advertising, because you're targeting a specific interest, specific people, is you want to signal as hard as possible to that user's pre-existing preferences. If that person likes Star Wars, you are going to signal hard to Star Wars, or you're going to signal hard to sci-fi. You're going to do things that are really, really, really specifically towards their interest. And this is the way that most people market books. In fact, this is the way people write books. When we talk about writing to market, it is, okay, what's this market? What's this group of people? What do they like? They like books like this that have, they like teenage vampire romance, which is actually a huge genre. So you go through and you find all the tropes that are in that, and you write a book that fills those needs, and you make a cover that signals exactly what's in the book and looks just like the other covers in the genre. Like I was showing those romance covers. Every genre is like this now. It's not just romance. Romance is a big joke, but there's, if I type in Western or something like that, you're going to get basically the same result as like fantasy or something like that. So here's like fantasy. So fantasy looks the same. All the fantasy books look the same. All the Western books look the same. They're all yellow. So you get this idea that the cover has to fit into the genre, because you're finely tuning the targeting of your ad. But it gets a little bit more complicated here, because there begins to be a feedback loop where if you do an original book cover, if you do a book cover that looks really good and stands out, people will assume that it's in the wrong place. People on Amazon will scroll past it because they'd be like, I'm looking for teenage vampire romance books. And so you wrote a teenage vampire romance book, but it's really got a great cover and it just doesn't look boring like all the other ones. People are going to assume, that probably is in the wrong place. It probably belongs to another genre. Even in a physical store, if you're writing a paranormal romance book and you don't have purple all over the cover, people will assume that it should be in a different section in the store, that it's not supposed to be in that paranormal romance section, which is full of purple books. So even not using the color of paranormal romance, which is purple and pink, if you don't use those colors, the user now has been so trained by seeing the same things over and over again for almost 20 years, they'll assume that it's in the wrong place, and that in fact the book is not what they want because it doesn't fit in the genre that they're looking for. So this is a really weird thing that exists, and you can rebel against it if you want, but you have to know that it's true when it comes to book covers or anything else, is that now people have been trained to view generic covers as frankly important for that being part of the genre. That if the cover doesn't look like it belongs in the genre, people will scroll past it and not click it because they think it's not what they want to read. So the end result here is that really super targeted marketing has gotten rid of all the creativity in advertising. So you'll notice they'll advertise it like a Star Wars game, and there won't be any Star Wars music. Rather, they'll have generic like dissonance score music because it's a sci-fi game, and so they're targeting people who like, or it's a shooter game, so they're targeting shooters. Imagine that you were going to like market Star Wars Dark Forces or something today, and it would be like, you'd say, this is a shooter just like Doom, and you'd show a bunch of corridors that look just like Doom, and maybe you'd show a stormtrooper because that's the unique thing about it. There might be some stormtroopers in it. What you wouldn't do is market it heavily as it's special in Star Wars and has lightsabers and it's just like Star Wars. You'd market it as a shooter because it fits in the shooter genre. You wouldn't, in fact, you may not even make a game like Dark Forces or Dark Forces 2 now, because you'd be like, no one wants a Star Wars shooter. People want Doom as a shooter. You'd have this kind of short circuit where it wouldn't even happen because you're assuming that people only want more of what they've already seen, because that's the way marketing has reinforced it over the last few years. I really find this true in books, is that when people are writing to market, they, instead of thinking of an original story that that might fit in a genre and genre readers might like, they start trying to hit every trope from a specific genre and make a cover that's exactly fits in that genre to try to sell books to people that are just trying to read things they've already read before. There's very little creativity. That's not the way I like to operate personally, but you can't rebel against it too much. So when I make a, this is a nonfiction book, and this is like a rebellious cover. This does not look like a nonfiction book, really. I made it look like a creative book because it's about creativity. I wanted it to really signal that it was about creativity. And this book and this book cover have actually done well because it's a little bit different. But, here's a fantasy book cover I did. I designed covers too. I designed my covers. So it's pretty generic. It's got like a medieval town and a couple of people and one color, right? and Cinzel decorative font. Even the fonts will signal your genres. If I had made a completely original cover, people would assume it's in the wrong genre and they won't click on it. That's just how it is. So even though it might be an original story, there's no gun. There's guns in this story, but there's no guns on the cover because guns don't go with fantasy. So you don't want to put them on the cover up front. You don't want to advertise it too much that there's, guns and cannons or pirates or something like that. Unless you're trying to sell a pirate book, that is. I'm trying to sell a fantasy book that happens to have pirates. Conan was a pirate too. Come on, fantasy. We can have fantasy pirates. So anyway, I wanted to explain that and really show why that is the case. And it is the case because you get this feedback loop with marketing. It has to do with the fact that everybody is marketing to an individual now, not marketing in a general group. You're not having to be creative to stand out and be successful. Rather, you're having to do the same thing that people are expecting you to do over and over again. The main way that you advertise to it is like, you like this thing? Here's a thing that's just like it. You'll like it too, right? And marketing departments have an effect in companies too. They say games should be this way because this is what people like, rather than trusting the creative people to make something new and original that's going to stand out and be special. You tell the worker bees to do what people already like because that's how we're going to market it. And you end up with this conventional wisdom that's really hard to overcome in these big companies. Like, why would we market Star Wars as something special? We should market it the way that things have already been proven to work and be effective. So it should look like this and not look like something specifically Star Wars. And that's where you end up with this. So thanks so much, guys. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, you can join my mailing list at dvspress.com/list. And I will see you all next time.